Cale Thorne wiped the crystalline dust from his protective visor as he surveyed the luminescent cavern before him. The twin suns of Celesta Prime cast an ethereal glow through the transparent mineral formations that adorned the rocky landscape, creating dancing patterns of lavender and amber light. His botanical scanner beeped softly, detecting the rare Solaris flowers growing in the thermal vents, precisely what he'd traveled across the galaxy to study. At 28 years old, Cale had devoted his entire career to understanding how plants adapted to extreme environments. His work on Earth had earned him a research grant to study the exotic flora of Celesta Prime, and for the past 3 months, he'd been meticulously documenting the crystalline gardens that thrived in this otherwise barren region. His superiors had warned him about venturing into restricted areas, but his passion for discovery often overrode caution. The path beneath his feet was worn smooth by countless footsteps, generations of them, perhaps. According to his preliminary research, these were the restricted sacred springs, areas off-limits to unauthorized visitors. But Cale wasn't truly unauthorized. He possessed permits signed by the Ministry of Natural Resources. Of course, those permits explicitly stated he should never deviate from marked trails. Yet here he was, following a botanical hunch into uncharted territory. The sound of splashing water made him pause. His scanner hadn't indicated the presence of other humans or Celestians in this sector. Cale moved cautiously forward, guided by the sound and the warmth intensifying against his face. Through the thick veil of rising steam, he could make out the silhouette of a natural hot spring, its waters glowing with a faint bioluminescent sheen. And then he saw her. The woman emerged briefly from the steaming waters, her back to him, her pale skin luminous in the filtered sunlight. Her hair was the color of midnight, flowing down her back in waves past her shoulders. She moved with a grace that seemed almost choreographed, as though bathing in these sacred waters was a ritual rather than a simple act of cleaning oneself. Cale's breath caught in his throat. In that frozen moment, before his brain could process what he should do, which was certainly to turn around and leave immediately their eyes met, she saw him. The woman's eyes, large and dark as the night sky, widened with a combination of shock and something else Cale couldn't quite identify. It might have been alarm. It was definitely alarm. Time seemed to suspend itself as they stared at each other across the steaming water, neither quite believing the other's presence. I'm so sorry," Cale stammered, immediately turning away and shielding his eyes with his hand. His face burned hotter than the thermal springs. "I didn't know anyone would be, that is, I was just researching the—" "Don't turn away," a voice commanded, both regal and furious. "It's too late for that now." Cale turned back to see the woman rising from the water with deliberate slowness, wrapping a white ceremonial towel around herself. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority, and despite her obvious embarrassment, she held her chin high. Water cascaded from her form, catching the light like diamonds. "I apologize profusely," Cale began, attempting to sound professional despite his racing heart. "This was entirely unintentional. I'm a botanical researcher, and I was tracking a particular species of—" "Your apologies are meaningless," she interrupted, and her voice carried a note of finality that made him stop mid-sentence. "By the ancient laws of my people, you have committed an act that cannot be overlooked. You have seen me unclothed in the sacred springs. This creates a bond that supersedes accidents or intentions." Cale blinked, trying to process her words. "I'm sorry, a bond? There are only 2 paths available to us now." She stepped out of the spring with dignity, her towel secured carefully around her form. "Either you become my betrothed and accept the ceremonial bonding, or we both face execution when the temple guards discover what has occurred." "Execution?" Cale's voice rose an octave. That can't be. Surely there's some way to explain." "There is no explanation that will satisfy sacred law. She moved closer, and Kale could now see her features clearly. She was extraordinarily beautiful, in a way that transcended mere physical appearance. There was intelligence in her eyes, strength in her bearing, and an underlying sadness that suggested she'd carried heavy burdens for a long time. The springs reveal truth. What has been seen cannot be unseen. What has been witnessed cannot be denied. A distant horn sounded, echoing off the crystal cliffs with an otherworldly resonance that made Kale's skin prickle. The woman's expression grew urgent. "The temple guards," she breathed. "We have only moments." She grabbed his arm, her fingers surprisingly strong, and pulled him toward a concealed cave entrance behind the spring. "Hide, quickly. I will attempt to turn them away, but you must understand once they discover you've been here, everything changes. We must decide our course before that happens." Kale found himself crouching in the shadowy cave, barely processing the surreal turn of events. Through the gaps in the rocks, he could see the woman, the princess. He somehow knew she was royalty, just by the way she carried herself, composing her features into an expression of serene meditation. "Your Highness?" A deep voice called out. "This is Captain Torvin of the Temple Guard. We received a report of an authorized presence in this sector." "Captain," the woman responded smoothly, stepping away from the spring and adjusting her towel with practiced elegance. "I was not aware of any restrictions today. I sought only solitude for personal communion with the sacred waters." Kale pressed himself against the cool cave wall, barely daring to breathe. This was a disaster. He was going to be executed on an alien planet because he'd made a wrong turn while researching flowers. If there was any humor in the situation, it was lost on him at this moment. "We've had reports of strange activity," the captain continued, his voice cautious. "An off-world visitor behaving erratically. Did you encounter anyone unusual?" "Of course not," she replied with just the right note of indignation. "I've been bathing continuously for the past hour. Would an off-worlder dare to intrude upon one of our most sacred rituals? Surely you know the penalty for such transgression." Kale could almost hear the smile in her voice. Whether it was confidence or the darkly humorous appreciation of irony, he couldn't tell. After several tense minutes of questioning, the guards departed, their footsteps fading into the distance. Kale remained frozen in the cave, his mind reeling. What was he supposed to do? Accept some kind of alien marriage because of an accidental encounter? The whole situation was absurd, impossible, completely illogical. The woman appeared at the cave entrance, silhouetted against the steaming waters, and extended her hand. "Come," she said softly. "There is much to discuss, and we don't have much time." As Kale took her offered hand, noting how small and delicate it was compared to his own, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just fundamentally, irrevocably changed. The secret passages beneath the palace were narrower than Kale expected, carved from the same luminescent crystal that adorned the exterior walls. Mira moved through them with practiced ease, guiding him through the labyrinth with the confidence of someone who'd explored these routes many times before. They emerged in a dimly lit corridor, lined with flowing tapestries depicting scenes of Celestian history battles, celebrations, and what appeared to be ritual ceremonies at the sacred springs. "We're safe here," Mira whispered, though her voice still carried the tension of their narrow escape. She'd changed into a flowing iridescent dress that seemed to capture and refract light, making her form appear to shift between solid and ethereal. Her midnight hair was now arranged in an elaborate braid adorned with small crystalline ornaments. "This wing is reserved for the royal family. My chambers are just ahead." Kale followed her into a vast room that seemed to exist between reality and dream. The walls were crafted entirely of crystal that shifted colors with the changing light of the twin suns, filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. Soft cushioned loungers, silk tapestries, and an array of exotic plants he didn't recognize filled the space with an otherworldly elegance. A gentle warmth permeated the room, reminiscent of the sacred springs where their paths had crossed mere hours ago. "You live here?" Cale couldn't help the awe in his voice. "I exist here," Myra corrected gently, moving toward a crystalline decanter filled with an iridescent liquid. "There's a difference between living and existing, I've learned. Sit, please. You must be in shock." Cale sat on one of the cushioned loungers, still processing the surreal nature of his circumstances. Hours ago, he'd been cataloging plant samples. Now he was in a princess's private chambers on an alien world, accused of needing to marry her or face execution. "I need to understand what's happening," Cale began, accepting the glass Mira offered him. The drink was surprisingly pleasant warm, with subtle notes of honey and something floral. "This law you mentioned, is it real? Actually enforceable?" Mira settled onto the lounger beside him, close enough that he could catch the exotic fragrance of flowers in her hair. "Among my people, the sacred springs are not merely places of bathing. They're places of spiritual revelation. When one person sees another in their most vulnerable, unguarded state within those waters, our traditions say a sacred bond is formed. Denying that bond is considered a rejection of truth itself, which is the greatest transgression in our culture." "But it was an accident," Cale protested, though even as he spoke, he realized how futile the argument was. "I didn't intentionally. Accidents are irrelevant to the law," Mira interrupted softly. "What matters is that you saw me, that I saw you seeing me. In that moment of mutual recognition, a connection was forged. My people believe such moments are never truly accidental. They believe the universe orchestrates these encounters for a reason." Cale set down his drink and turned to face her fully. "Then why did you hide me? If this is your tradition, your law, why not let the guards find me?" Myra's expression grew complex, a mixture of defiance and vulnerability. "Because I don't wish to be executed, and neither do you. But more importantly," she paused, her dark eyes searching his face, "I wanted to understand why the universe brought us together before society forced us into predetermined roles." "Predetermined roles?" "I was fleeing an arranged marriage," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lord Herrick has been pursuing my father's approval for months. He's powerful, politically connected, and old enough to be my grandfather. My father has been struggling with the pressure to accept his suit. When the guards approached the springs today, you became my escape route, though I suspect that's not how the universe intended it." Cale studied her face, seeing beneath the royal composure to the woman underneath. Despite her title and her palace, she was trapped by circumstances just as surely as any commoner might be. "Tell me about you," he said. "Not Princess Mira, not the daughter of the High Counselor. Tell me about who you are." She smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed her face and made the crystal walls around them pulse with warmer tones. "I love the gardens beneath the palace. I spend hours there studying the bioluminescent plants and trying to cultivate new species. I'm fascinated by adaptation and growth. I read Earth literature. We have translations in our archives. I've always wondered what it would be like to visit your world, to see rain instead of thermal mist, to feel soil beneath my fingers instead of only crystal." Cale felt something shift in his chest. "I study plants," he said quietly. "I came here to understand how life adapts to extreme conditions. I've dedicated my life to understanding growth and resilience in hostile environments." "Then perhaps the universe isn't being as random as we assume," Mira said, her voice carrying a note of wonder. They talked through the afternoon and into the evening, sharing stories of their lives, their ambitions, and their dreams. Mira showed him her collection of botanical specimens from across Celesta Prime and asked him to identify and explain the Earth. flora from his research. Cale found himself captivated, not just by her beauty, but by her brilliant, curious mind. She questioned him relentlessly about Earth's ecosystems, asking about rainforests and oceans, deserts and tundra, as the twin suns set, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Cale realized he'd stopped thinking of this as a disaster and started seeing it as something far more complicated and infinitely more dangerous, a genuine connection. "What happens tomorrow?" he asked as the light faded. "When your father discovers I'm here." Mayra hesitated, and for the first time, her composed facade cracked. "I don't know. My father is a just man, but he's also bound by tradition and political necessity. If he refuses to acknowledge our union, if he sides with those who call it an accident rather than fate, then the temple guards will come for you. You could face exile at minimum, execution at worst." Cale reached out and took her hand, noting how perfectly it fit within his own. "Then we need to convince him and the council that this is real." "That we're real, is it?" Mayra asked, her eyes meeting his with startling intensity. "Is what we're feeling real, or is it simply the intensity of circumstance? We've known each other for mere hours." "I don't know," Cale answered honestly. "But I'd like to find out, if you would." The crystal walls around them shimmered with patterns of gold and rose, and Mayra smiled a smile that suggested she, too, wanted to find out what lay between them beyond the accident that brought them together. The Grand Council Chamber was a marvel of architectural ambition, vast circular room with towering crystal columns that seemed to support the sky itself. Cale stood beside Mayra, their hands joined in the traditional manner of betrothed couples as presented by her attendants that morning. The High Counselor Vespian sat at the center of the curved crystal dais, his expression carefully neutral, though the whiteness of his knuckles, as he gripped his ceremonial staff, suggested internal turmoil. Surrounding them were council members, whose faces ranged from curious to openly hostile. Lord Herrick occupied a prominent seat, his thin lips curved in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was precisely as Mayra had described, silver-haired, aristocratic, and regarding Cale with a kind of dismissive contempt reserved for those considered beneath one's station. "This union," High Counselor Vespian began, his voice carrying the weight of generations of tradition, "claims legitimacy through the ancient laws of the sacred springs. You maintain, Princess, that this encounter was not accidental, but ordained by our traditions?" "I do, Father," Mayra responded, her voice steady despite the challenging atmosphere. "Commander, Cale Thorne witnessed my true form in the sacred waters. According to our laws, this creates an unbreakable bond." Lord Herrick leaned forward, his voice dripping with disdain. "And we're to believe this human simply stumbled upon the most restricted site on our world by mere chance? That he didn't orchestrate this encounter to manipulate our princess and gain political advantage?" Cale felt Mayra's hand tighten around his, but he stepped forward slightly. "I had no idea the springs were restricted to me. I'm a botanical researcher studying the rare flora in this region. My permits authorize my presence in the surrounding areas. I was following what I believed to be an unmarked path to track specimens of Solaris flowers. The encounter was entirely unplanned." "Convenient," another council member muttered. The chamber erupted in overlapping voices, some defending the ancient law, others questioning its validity in modern circumstances. Cale could see the political factions forming, those who supported traditional interpretations and those who viewed the marriage as an aberration. Then the crowd parted. An elderly woman in flowing robes of deep purple and silver advanced toward the dais with deliberate grace. Her pale eyes seemed to look through, rather than at those around her, and everyone including Vespian rose in respect. "The Oracle Seraph," someone whispered beside Cale. The Oracle studied Cale and Mayra with an intensity that made him feel as though she could see into the very depths of his soul. She raised one hand, and the chamber fell silent. "I have visited the sacred springs where these two paths crossed," Sereth announced, her voice carrying a peculiar resonance that seemed to echo from the crystal walls themselves. "I have consulted the waters, studied the patterns left by their presence. What I found was not deception, but destiny." "Destiny?" Lord Herrick scoffed, rising from his seat. "Or a convenient excuse for poor judgment. The springs respond to intention, Oracle. Is it not possible that this human intended to infiltrate our sacred site and manipulate our traditions?" Sereth turned her unsettling gaze toward Herrick, and the older man visibly paled. "Do you question the spring's wisdom when it contradicts your desires, Lord Herrick? When your courtship of Princess Mira was rejected by those very waters, did you not accept their judgment then?" A ripple of reaction swept through the chamber. Herrick's face flushed crimson as he sat abruptly, clearly unaccustomed to being openly contradicted. Before Sereth could continue, a young aide rushed into the chamber, breathless and urgent. He approached medical advisor Solness, whispering rapidly. Solness's eyes widened as he reviewed the crystal tablet the aide had brought. "High Counselor," Solness announced, standing and silencing the murmurs with his formal tone. "We have completed the biological compatibility analysis between this human and our princess. The results are unprecedented." Vespian gestured for him to continue, his expression shifting from neutral to deeply intrigued. "The genetic structures, though from entirely different evolutionary lineages, show remarkable complementary markers," Solness explained, studying the glowing data on his tablet. "In fact, the compatibility is so precise that it suggests—" He paused, as though hesitant to speak the extraordinary conclusion aloud. "It suggests that such a union would produce offspring of extraordinary potential. Their combined genetic material would create an entirely new subspecies with enhanced adaptability and cognitive capacity." The chamber erupted in shocked exclamations. Some seemed thrilled at the prospect, while others appeared deeply disturbed by the implications. Cale felt Mira squeeze his hand, and when he looked at her, he saw tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness, he realized, but tears of overwhelming emotion at this validation. "This is remarkable," Vespian said slowly, his voice thoughtful. "The universe does not make mistakes. Our ancient traditions speak of such moments' convergences between worlds that create evolutionary leaps." Lord Herrick rose again, his voice sharp with desperation. "This proves nothing except that the human possesses useful genetic material. It does not prove the marriage is legitimate, or that the springs truly ordained this union." "The springs do not lie," Sereth said firmly. Moving to stand beside Cale and Mira, she placed one ancient hand on each of their shoulders. And the crystal walls of the chamber began to glow with soft, harmonious colors. "I have served as oracle for 50 years, and in all that time I have never felt the spring's presence so strongly as I do now. These two souls were meant to find each other. The springs are windows to truth, and the truth is written in their compatibility, their destiny, their connection." Vespian stood, and the entire chamber rose with him. "It seems," he said, a subtle smile touching his lips as he looked at his daughter, "that the ancient laws have spoken more clearly than they have in generations. This council recognizes the union of Cale Thorne and Princess Mira as legitimate and blessed by our sacred traditions." A cheer rose from approximately half the chamber, while the other half remained silent in contemplation or resistance. But Cale barely heard them. He was looking at Myra, watching the relief and joy wash over her face, and realizing that somewhere in the chaos of the past 24 hours, he'd fallen completely and irrevocably in love with her. "There is one final matter," Vespian continued, his gaze fixing on Cale with surprising warmth. "Cale Thorne, you will need to undergo the formal rituals of bonding. This is not merely a legal union, but a spiritual one. Are you prepared to accept not just our daughter as your partner, But our world, our traditions, and our people? Kale took a deep breath and looked into Myra's dark, hopeful eyes. I am, he said with absolute certainty. I came to this world to understand adaptation and growth. I'm beginning to realize that life's greatest transformations happen when we allow ourselves to be open to the unexpected. Mira is the most unexpected, beautiful gift the universe could have offered me. Myra's laugh rang through the chamber like crystal chimes in the wind, and even the most skeptical council members seemed touched by the genuine joy that filled the space between them.